This is Dr. Ranjit Singh once again with you. And the lecture of discussion for today is Aristotle and his very popular work Poetics. Poetics is considered the earliest surviving work of dramatic theory. First of all, let's discuss about Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and polymath during the classical period in ancient Greece. He was the disciple of Plato, and Plato himself was an Athenian philosopher during the classical period in ancient Greece. Aristotle was born in the city of Stagira in northern Greece in 384 BC. His father, Nicomachus, died when Aristotle was a child, and he was brought up by a guardian. At 17 or 18 years of age, Aristotle joined Plato's academy in Athens and remained there until the age of 37, around 347 BC. Shortly after Plato died, Aristotle left Athens and at the request of Philip II of Macedonia, he tutored Alexander the Great, beginning in 343 BC. Now let's move to Poetics, his very popular work, Poetics. Aristotle's Poetics was written around 335 BC, and it is the earliest surviving work of dramatic theory and the first extant philosophical treatise to focus on literary theory. It is believed that Aristotle's Poetics originally comprised two books, one on tragedy and epic, the other on comedy. But the portion that focuses on tragedy and epic has survived only. The portion of the Poetics that survives discusses mainly tragedy and epic poetry. He defines poetry as the mimetic or imitative use of language, rhythm and harmony, separately or in combination. Poetry is mimetic in that it creates a representation of objects and events in the world. Unlike philosophy, for example, which presents ideas. Humans are naturally drawn to imitation, and so poetry has a strong pull on us. It can also be an excellent learning device, since we can coolly observe imitations of things like dead bodies and disgusting animals when the real thing would disturb us. Aristotle identifies tragedy as the most refined version of poetry, dealing with lofty matters, and comedy as the most refined version of poetry, dealing with base matters. He traces a brief and speculative history of tragedy as it evolved from the dithyrambic hymns in praise of the god Dionysius. Dithyrambs were sung by a large choir, sometimes featuring a narrator. Aeschylus invented tragedy by bringing a second actor into dialogue with the narrator. Sophocles innovated further by introducing a third actor, and gradually tragedy shifted to its contemporary dramatic form. Aristotle defines tragedy according to seven characteristics. First, it is mimetic. Second, it is serious. Third, it tells a full story of an appropriate length. Fourth, it contains rhythm and harmony. Fifth, Rhythm and harmony occur in different combinations in different parts of the tragedy. Sixth, it is performed rather than narrated. And the last one, seventh, it arouses feelings of pity and fear and then purges these feelings through catharsis. A tragedy consists of six components or six parts, which are listed here in order from most important to least important. The first component is plot, and Aristotle says plot is the most important thing because plot is the soul of tragedy. The second component is character. Third component is thought or dialogues. Fourth one is diction, the choice and arrangement of words in language. Fifth one is melody, and the sixth one, the last one, is spectacle scenes. Now, after discussing these six components of tragedy, Aristotle defines them one by one in detail. He discusses about plot. He says a well-formed plot must have a beginning, which is not a necessary consequence of any previous action. That plot must have a middle, which follows logically from the beginning, and the plot must have an end, which follows logically from the middle, and from which no further action necessarily follows. The plot should be unified as a whole. It means that every element of the plot should tie in to the rest of the plot, leaving no loose ends. This kind of unity allows tragedy to express universal themes powerfully, which makes it superior to history. Aristotle says these are the qualities that makes tragedy superior to history. Because history can talk about particular events only. Episodic plots are bad because in episodic plots there is no necessity to the sequence of events. The best kind of plot contains surprises, but surprises that fit logically into the sequence of events. The best kinds of surprises are brought about by peripeteia. Peripeteia refers to the reversal of fortune, and anagnosis refers to the discovery of the previous events or discovery of something that has taken place earlier. A good plot progresses like a knot that is tied up with increasingly greater complexity until the moment of peripeteia, at which point the knot is gradually untied until it reaches a completely unknotted conclusion. For a tragedy to arouse pity and fear, then Aristotle considers that catharsis is the supreme objective of a tragedy. So for catharsis, he says that through pity and fear, bringing about catharsis. For a tragedy to arouse pity and fear, we must observe a hero who is relatively noble going from happiness to misery. As a result of error on the part of the hero, and Aristotle says that downfall in the life of the hero must be as a result of his own actions. And that downfall should not be on the basis of his weakness in character. That must be on the basis of an error of judgment on the part of the hero. Our pity and fear is aroused when it is family members who harm one another rather than enemies or strangers. In the best kind of plot, one character narrowly avoids killing a family member unwittingly thanks to an anagnosis. that reveals the family connection. The hero must have good qualities, appropriate to his or her station, position, and should be portrayed realistically and consistently. Since both the character of the hero and the plot must have logical consistency. Aristotle concludes that the untying of the plot must follow as necessary consequence of the plot and not from stage artifice like Deus ex machina. And this Deus ex machina is a state device that was used in Greek dramas when a machine in some place it was used in which an actor playing one of the gods was lowered onto the stage at the end. Aristotle discusses thought and diction then, and he says that thought and diction they must be appropriate to melt the heart of the audience. And then Aristotle moves on to address epic poetry. Whereas tragedy consists of actions presented in a dramatic form, epic poetry consists of verse presented in a narrative form. Tragedy and epic poetry have many common qualities, most notably the unity of plot and similar subject matter. However, epic poetry can be longer than tragedy, and because it is not performed, it can deal with more fantastic actions with a much wider scope. By contrast, tragedy can be more focused and takes advantage of the devices of music and spectacle. Epic poetry and tragedy are also written in different meters. After defending poetry against charges that it deals with improbable or impossible events, Aristotle concludes by weighing tragedy against epic poetry and determining that tragedy is on the whole superior. Then Aristotle takes a scientific approach to poetry, which bears as many disadvantages as advantages. He studies poetry as he would a natural phenomenon, observing and analyzing first and only afterward making tentative hypotheses and recommendations. The scientific approach works best at identifying the objective, law-like behavior that underlines the phenomena being observed. To this end, Aristotle draws some important general conclusions about the nature of poetry and how it achieves its effect. However, in assuming that there are objective laws underlying poetry, Aristotle fails to appreciate the ways in which art often progresses precisely by overturning the assumed laws of a previous generation. If every play were written in strict accordance with a given set of laws for a long enough time, a revolutionary playwright would be able to achieve powerful effects by consciously violating these laws. In point of fact, Euripides, the last of the three great tragic poets of ancient Greece, wrote many plays that violated the logical and structured principles of Aristotle's Poetics, in a conscious effort to depict a world that he saw as neither logical nor structured. Aristotle himself gives mixed reviews to Euripides' travelling plays, but they are still performed 2.5 millennia after they were written. Then Aristotle gives his concept of mimesis. Aristotle's concept of mimesis helps him to explain what is distinctive about our experience of art. Poetry is mimetic. It means that it invites us to imagine its subject matter as real while acknowledging that it is in fact fictional. When Aristotle contrasts poetry with philosophy, His point is not so much that poetry is mimetic, because it portrays what is real, while philosophy is non mimetic, because it portrays only ideas. Rather, the point is that the ideas discussed in philosophical texts are as real as any ideas ever are. When we see an actor playing Oedipus, the character of Oedipus, very popular play written by Sophocles. So this actor Oedipus is clearly a substitute through which we can imagine what a real Oedipus might be like. When we read Aristotle's ideas on art, we are in direct contact with the ideas, and there is nothing more real to imagine. Art presents reality at one level of remove, allowing us a certain detachment. We do not call the police when we see Hamlet killing Polonius, a very important event that takes place in Shakespeare's drama Hamlet, because we know that we are not seeing a real event but only two actors imitating real world possibilities. Because we are conscious of the mimesis involved in art, we are detached enough that we can reflect on what we are experiencing and so learn from it. Witnessing a murder in real life is emotionally scaring. Witnessing a murder on a stage gives us a chance to reflect on the nature and causes of human violence so that we can lead a more reflective and sensitive life. Then Aristotle talks about catharsis, the supreme objective of a tragedy. Aristotle says catharsis is the distinctive experience of art, though it is not clear whether he means that catharsis is the purpose of art or simply an effect. The Greek word catharsis that starts with K originally means purging or purifications and refers also to the induction of vomiting by a doctor to rid the body of impurities. Aristotle uses the term metaphorically to refer to the release of the emotions of pity and fear built up in a dramatic performance. Because dramatic performances end, whereas life goes on. We can let go of the tension that builds during a dramatic performance in a way that we often cannot let go of the tension that builds up over the course of our lives. Because we can let go of it, the emotional intensity of art deepens us, whereas emotional intensity in life often just hardens us. However, if this process of catharsis that allows us to experience powerful emotions and then let them go is the ultimate purpose of art, then art becomes the equivalent of therapy. If we define catharsis as the purpose of art, we have failed to define art in a way that explains why it is still necessary in an era of psychiatry. A more generous reading of Aristotle might interpret catharsis as a means to a less easily defined end, which involves a deeper capacity for feeling and compassion, a deeper awareness of what our humanity consists in. Aristotle insists on the primacy of plot. He says plot is ultimately what we can learn from in a piece of art. The word we translate as plot is the Greek word muthos, M-U-T-H-O-S, which is the root for myth. Muthos is a more general term than plot, as it can apply to any art form, including music or sculpture. The mythos of a piece of art is its general structure and organization, the form according to which the themes and ideas in the piece of art make themselves apparent. The plot of a story, as the term is used in the Poetics, is not the sequence of events so much as the logical relationships that exist between events. For Aristotle, the tighter the logical relationships between events, the better the plot. Then, another important play of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, one example from there, because Oedipus Rex is a very powerful tragedy by Sophocles. And this Oedipus Rex was performed around 429 BC. So, Oedipus Rex is a very powerful tragedy precisely because we can see the logical inevitability with which the events in the story fall together. The logical relationships between events in a story help us to perceive logical relationships between the events in our own lives. In essence, tragedy shows us patterns in human experience that we can then use to make sense of our own experience. This is all about the Poetics, the very popular work Poetics that Aristotle has written. And you must have got so far how poetics is very important for the students of literature, as it is the earliest surviving work on dramatic theory that gives Aristotle's ideas about poetry and tragedy. This is all for today. In our next lecture, we will discuss Aristotle's concept of tragedy in detail. So, thank you. Thank you very much.